This week in social studies, we are going to talk about World War One and the 1920s, and this is using the My World Social Studies workbook. We are beginning on Chapter 9, so I'm going to put here Chapter 9, and this is Lesson 1. We are not going to read all of the passages, all of the whole text, since we're talking about World War One. We're going to read pages 314 and 315 for World War One. Then we are going to read about the 1920s, and those pages for the 1920s is page 318 and 319. So those are the only 4 pages that we're going to read for this lesson. Alright, so let's talk about World War One. And if you see, there's a picture here, a photo that says before 1920, and remember we talked about 1920, and that has to do with inventions. Women were denied the right to vote. Posters pointed out how unfair this was. And it said, no vote, no tax, no vote, no tax. That's just a photo. Alright, far across the ocean in 1914, war broke out in Europe. Britain, France, Europe, Britain, France, Italy, and Russia formed an alliance. An alliance is a formal agreement of friendship between countries. These 4 countries were known as the Allied powers. Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey, formed the Central Powers. So we had 2 types of powers, and I'm going to write these on the side. So the Allied were Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Ottoman. And then we talked about the Central. I'm going to try to squeeze this in here. Central oops, I have those backwards. Sorry. These are the Central and the Allied were Britain, France, Italy, and Russia. Okay? Alright. So, World War One. President Woodrow Wilson asked the people of the United States, so he was the president, Woodrow Wilson, of the United States, not to take sides in the war because it did not have anything to do with us. Here is the United States, and if you see, the red one is the Central Powers, which are these red countries, and the green are the Allied powers. Okay, and I know you're saying, well, the United States is green, but let me explain why. Then, in 1915, a German submarine sank a British passenger ship called the Lusitania. More than 1,100 people died, including 128 Americans. Though angry, the United States still did not want to declare war. German naval attacks on merchants and other ships increased, and in April 1917, the United States finally joined the Allied powers to fight Germany and the Central Power. So not until 1917. And the war started in 1914. So this map is a map of 1917. So all the green were Allied powers and the red were Central powers. It says, identify and write the names of the continents on which the major Allied and Central powers were located. And we're looking at continents. And the continents were North America, Europe, and Asia. Oh, sorry. Okay. And on page 315, we're going to continue with World War One and how Texans go to war. World War One had a big impact on life in Texas and the nation. Millions of Americans joined the armed forces to fight the Central Powers. More than 20,000 of them were women who went to Europe to serve as nurses. Nearly 200,000 Texans also joined up. Among them were 450 nurses. The new soldiers needed training. The United States set up camps where they could learn new skills and work as a team. In Texas, the largest included Camp MacArthur in Waco, Camp Logan in Houston, and Camp Travis in San Antonio, and Camp Bowie in Fort Worth. Training for officers took place at Leon Springs. Airplanes came into common use during World War I. Many new pilots trained in San Antonio. At Kelly Field, there were more than 1,500 men who learned to fly. Thousands more learned how to be airplane mechanics. Pilots also learned at the nearby Stinson School of Flying. Marjorie Stinson, a licensed pilot, had founded the school. She, her sister Catherine, and her brothers all helped run it. To summarize, identify how World War I impacted life in Texas. So we're going to put that Texans joined the Army, the armed services, and military campuses or camps in Texas, trained soldiers. Okay, so one thing was that the Texans, they joined the armed services, and the second thing is that we started having a lot of training camps. All right, so now let's look at the 1920s. I am going to page 318. So I'm skipping to that page. The Roaring Twenties. It was an era of progress. Life changed quickly for Texans because now people were going out to other countries to go to war. And the United States during the 1920s. The experience of war and the issue of women equality had an impact on people's lives in Texas and the nation. It changed the people's views. Society was becoming more modern. Now remember, we started having inventions. We talked about the invention of the assembly line last week. We also talked about the inventions of telephones. Businesses developed and grew. Today we call this period the Roaring Twenties. Between 1920 and 1929, the free enterprise system helped industries and cities grow rapidly. Factories had made products for World War I turn to making things people would buy. To keep up with the demand, they hired more workers. So more workers meant more jobs and more money. More people had more jobs and money than ever before. And that's a good thing. That was a plus. Many people bought their own homes. Progress also meant having the latest inventions like radios, telephones, and refrigerators. They were popular. New technology made the automobile more affordable. People began to use more oil and gas than ever before. In Texas, the oil industry boomed. Remember, we talked about that too. The drilling at Spindletop. Using Texas oil, gasoline companies built more oil refineries. By 1928, Texans owned more than 1 million cars and trucks. Cities and states built better roads for vehicles. Look at all of these different inventions. We were talking about radios, telephones, refrigerators, more gasoline, more jobs, more oil refineries. They had more cars, more trucks, more roads. They even built them better. The paved highways encouraged people to travel more. New businesses developed to meet the needs of drivers. There were gas stations, and motorist hotels or motels became more common because people were traveling and they needed a place to stay. So it was booming again. The business in Texas was booming again. All right, so it says identify the impact on life in Texas. Identify the impact on life in Texas of increased use of oil and gas during the 1920s. So what did it mean by them having more oil and gas? They could travel for business. And there were also better jobs and better roads. Okay. All right. So also, you see all the things that happened in the 1920s. Texas started booming. All right. So they also had the Jazz Age in the 1920s. American cities grew at a fast pace. We already see that everything's going. Farmers left their land and took factory jobs. So they were leaving the country and moving into the city to get a job at the factory. The price for farm products had dropped. Many farmers could no longer earn a living on the land, so they moved to cities to look for jobs. The city moved to a fresh new beat, jazz. So jazz is a type of music started in African American communities. Its exciting, strong rhythms gave the 1920s another nickname. It was called the Jazz Age. People looked for new things to do and new ways to have fun. The ragtime music of Texas-born musician Scott Joplin was popular. In Deep Ellum, a Dallas neighborhood, people went to nightclubs to dance and listen to live music. Deep Ellum was a center for jazz and blues music. The blues gave voice through song to the experiences of African Americans in the South. Texas blues singer Blind Lemon Jefferson recorded more than 100 songs. Radio and movies played a role in entertainment. Many families in Texas and other states gathered around the radio after dusk. They heard news reports, radio plays, comedy shows, and musical programs. At the picture show, which is another word for movies, people watch black and white silent movies. The radio and the movies were not the way that they are now. Now radio, you just listen mostly to music, but back in the 1920s, they would listen to stories, they would listen to the news, they would listen to comedy shows. Not until the late 1920s, did the first major talkie, they called it talkie, or movie with sound, the way that we watch movies now, came out. It was called The Jazz Singer. So there were many, many things happening in Texas during the 1920s. The question says, explain why cities grew in the 1920s. Use details from the text to support your answer. So why did the cities grow? Because people left the farms